Yo, this video contains spoilers about Season 8, Episode 3 of Game of Thrones. If you don't want to be spoiled about the Battle of Winterfell, don't watch this video. Okay, I love Game of Thrones. I really do. It's one of only a handful of shows I've ever watched all the way through. It has some of the most interesting moments, some of the most memorable characters, and some of the best dialogue I have ever seen in cinema or television. But at this point, it is impossible to ignore the drastic drop in the quality of writing, dialogue, and pacing that has continued unabated over the last 10 episodes, and you can make a very good argument the fall began well before that. Don't even get me started on the Butchering of the Dorne storyline, which is one of my favorite novel arcs in the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire, but had a steamy, fat deuce dropped on it in the show. What was consistently great TV in the first 4 seasons, that had flashes of brilliance in seasons 5 through 7, has not started off well in this, the final act of the most expensive television series ever made. I still enjoy it, and I'm going to be there every step of the way from here on out, but Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night, had problems, and a lot of them. So, we're going to use Total War Warhammer as a canvas and some background eye candy to paint a picture as I discuss the episode and why the tactics used in the defense of Winterfell were so terrible. Look, it's easy to armchair general and Monday morning quarterback. You can look at any major battle in history and nitpick it to death after the fact. As cliche as it is, hindsight is 2020, but my god, there was some horrendous decision making last Sunday evening. From a visual perspective, amazing. Bone-chilling. Epic. To see a horde of screaming Dothraki plunge into the night with their flaming araks, then have true darkness descend on them and seemingly snuff out any hope, super well done. To see zombies falling from the ramparts, from the rooftops like some form of divine punishment, incredible. And to see Winterfell, a place we have come to know and love and appreciate, completely overrun, it was special, and it was terrifying. But from a tactics and a logic perspective, the defense of Winterfell and the battle of the living versus the dead made very little sense. And that's part of the problem, right? It was very Hollywood. It was very turn off your brain. Looked awesome on the big screen, but then again, Optimus Prime and Megatron look awesome on the big screen too, but no one's actually sitting back and singing the praises of Transformers as art in cinematic form. More important people died at the Battle of Hogwarts and at the Battle of the Capitol in the Hunger Games, young adult novels, than in the Siege of Winterfell, in Game of Thrones, a show that for the last 7 seasons has told us that no one is safe, no matter how popular, no matter how important, no matter how good of a fighter or tactician they are. D&D, you guys have the largest budget in television history. Can you please hire a real goddamn military consultant and actually use their advice? Because unless they're just sniffing your butts the whole time, or you outright ignored what they told you, there is no way they signed off on the vast majority of what transpired on Sunday. And look, sacrifices have to be made in terms of realism to make for a good show. That's just a fact. No one is watching Game of Thrones for a dissertation on realistic battlefield tactics, and I don't need or want them to deliver that. We don't need to see sieges that last for 5 years. We don't need to see hyper-realistic combat. I get why they used flaming arrows in this episode, despite the fact that flaming arrows would not be effective at killing anything in a real-life scenario. But there is a huge difference between suspension of disbelief and outright lunacy. And too many times on Sunday evening, that line was crossed, and it was crossed badly. So, let's begin with the actual layout of the defense. I don't have a problem with fighting outside Winterfell at all. It's just not big enough to hold that many people. The Dothraki are useless inside. You can bring more archers to bear and fire from the safety of the walls for longer if you've got an army in front of the gate, and the cavalry actually has room to maneuver and do what they're meant to do if you fight outdoors. But just from the word go, before a single shot has been fired, there are some major problems. For one, the artillery is positioned in front of the huge pit of wooden stakes, the last line of defense before the walls themselves. Why? Why would you ever put catapults there? Move them back behind the infantry, make them the closest thing to the walls, and suddenly they have much more room to fire and much more protection against the incoming undead. Instead, they're placed directly behind the Dothraki, in and amongst the front and middle ranks, and as a result, they get completely overrun after the first volley and soon after the infantry combat is joined. They only fire one volley before they are completely inundated by a bunch of zombos. Same thing with the infantry. Why are the Unsullied forming phalanx in front of the stake pit? All this does is force an inevitable retreat into a choke point where you are guaranteed to lose way more troops than necessary. If the trench is moved out and upwards, and the phalanx is stationed behind it, then they can hold the line as the zombies impale themselves trying to cross it, and form a much more effective defense. Now, one of the most egregious examples of horrific battlefield tactics the entire night came with the Dothraki. We'll represent them with the Grail Guardians here because of their flaming swords, and how they must have felt when Lady Melisandre lit up the night sky and turned their Araks into Infernos of Doom. They must have felt pretty badass, pretty knightly. And look, adrenaline is a very real thing in combat scenarios. When it's life or death, when the chips are down, when it's fight or flight, and your sword is lit on fire alongside with thousands of your brothers, that can go to your head a bit and make you behave a bit foolishly. And the Dothraki are not the most tactical people to begin with. Great fighters, yes, not exactly known for their finesse though, but they know full well using cavalry to charge massed infantry formations of determined enemies does not work. It has never worked in history, especially when that massed infantry feels no fear, no pain, and no desire for anything but blood. But screw our own history. The writing in-universe has already established that a high morale, severely outnumbered group of determined warriors can beat back a gigantic horde of cavalry. That's what the Unsullied did to the Dothraki at the city of Qohor. 3,000 Dovahkides against 20,000 Dothraki Screamers. Guess who won? The determined, disciplined spear phalanx repelling the charge of 20,000 cavalrymen more than a dozen times, and slaughtering the Cav, almost to a man. Every single Dothraki